Before I tell you the location and the date of today's case, I first want to introduce you to the sponsor of this video, Toon Blast. Before we get into today's case, I want to thank Toon Blast for sponsoring this video. If you haven't heard of Toon Blast, it's a free-to-play mobile game where you have to solve puzzles by blasting cubes and creating powerful combos to pass levels. The graphics are great, and there are over 7,000 fun levels to play. Also, you don't need Wi-Fi to play, so you can enjoy playing anywhere and at any time. One great thing about Toon Blast is that it's easy to learn, and there's also a bunch of fun and challenging mini-games that you can play to claim rewards. Personally, I enjoy playing after researching a long case, all while travelling, and there are no adverts, which makes playing even more relaxing. If you're a more competitive gamer, you can even compete in events against other players around the world, where you can win great prizes. Toon Blast has millions of high ratings on the Apple Store and Google Play, so be sure to try it out. If you are anything like me and love the satisfaction of solving puzzles and advancing through levels, then make sure to download Toon Blast for free by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comments, or by scanning the QR code. Today we are looking at a case from the very start of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to England. James Mitchell was born in the 1780s in the city of Salisbury in the English county of Wiltshire. He had a humble upbringing, the son of a farm labourer, and when he was considered old enough, he started working in the fields, employed as a ploughboy. However, James did not have the ambition to follow his father and work on a farm. He wanted to improve his situation. Britain's economic landscape was undergoing a significant transformation. The reliance on agriculture as a primary means of employment was in decline. By 1800, only 1/3 of the people were employed in agricultural activities. 50 years earlier, it had been half the workforce. This profound social and economic change had continued to evolve. King George III was on the throne. The Tory and the Whig Party fought to gain control of Parliament and argued over issues such as political reform and religious freedom. The Napoleonic Wars began in 1803, which posed a formidable challenge as the French Empire battled to gain dominance over Europe. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, propelling Britain from an agrarian-based society to an industrial powerhouse. Factories, new technologies and transportation networks fueled economic growth and urbanisation. However, this brought social challenges, with the working class facing hardships and inequality between the rich and the poor. Culturally, the Romantic movement flourished, with writers like William Wordsworth and Jane Austen capturing the spirit of the age. With so much economic, industrial and social change, it was common for young men and women to leave the area where they were born and raised in order to look for a more prosperous life. James Mitchell was one such man. He left Salisbury and moved to London, where he secured a position as a gentleman's servant. He was considered a good worker and fulfilled his duties well, but as a young man, he wanted to make a better life for himself. London had emerged as the most populated city in the world and the most dominant metropolis in Western Europe. It housed a population of slightly more than 1 million, which was nearly double that of Paris. Naples in Italy was Europe's third most populated city at the time, with 450,000 inhabitants. James would often go out for long walks along the river or in the parks. It was very different to the small city of Salisbury, where he had lived as a child with his parents. London was a bustling tapestry of life and commerce. The streets full of people from a very varied social standing. Carriages and pedestrians jostled for space, while vendors hawked their wares. Architectural wonders adorned the thoroughfares, displaying the city's grandeur. Yet amongst the vibrancy, filth and squalor lurked in the narrow alleys. Dimly lit gas lamps at night held an air of mystery and danger. They captured the stark contrast between opulence and poverty, encapsulating the complexities of urban life. It was when James Mitchell was taking in the splendours of the city that he encountered a young lady named Miss Mary Ann Welchman. She was a talented and diligent dressmaker who was employed by Miss Macy and her sister, who owned a well-known and successful dress shop in Mount Street in the Mayfair district of the city of Westminster, a very affluent area of London. Miss Welchman was a forewoman. She looked after the seamstresses and helped with the customers. The building had 3 stories and consisted of a shop, a workroom, a kitchen, a dining room, a lounge, and bedrooms for the young ladies who worked there, one of which was occupied by Miss Welchman. Mr. James Mitchell had first met the young lady when he saw her in the street. It was raining, so he offered her his umbrella and escorted her back to her workplace. She thanked him for his kindness and considered that to be the end of their acquaintance. However, this was not the case, as Mr. Mitchell, who had told her that he worked as a purser aboard a ship, called on the young lady again in an attempt to win her affection. For nearly 2 years, he embarked in a romantic pursuit, during which Mary Ann naively fell for his deception. Initially, he was received with a cordial welcome, and she would occasionally allow him to escort her on a Sunday walk through Hyde Park. But as time passed, she grew tired of him, especially as he started to act inappropriately towards her. He came to the dress shop at improper hours and engaged in coarse and indelicate conversations with other young ladies in the workroom. When Miss Welchman's brother learned of this, he urged her to sever ties with the gentleman, and although Miss Welchman considered this to be the appropriate course of action, when she told Mr. Mitchell that she no longer wanted him to call on her, he refused to accept her change of heart. She attempted to reason with him and continued to request that he no longer visits, yet he stubbornly persisted. He continued to arrive at the residence unannounced, usually when the dress shop was closed, and he seemingly completely disregarded Mary Ann's pleas for him to desist. The owners of the dress shop, Miss Macy and her sister, told Mary Ann that the visits from Mr. Mitchell were very distracting and that he should no longer call upon her. However, he continued to show up uninvited. On Friday the 5th of August 1814, Mr. Mitchell again arrived at the Mount Street dress shop after the last customer had left. It was still light outside, and he made his way to the workroom. The seamstresses had finished for the day and had gone to rest before supper. Miss Welchman reluctantly went to the workroom to try and reason with him, but he was ill-tempered and was displaying erratic and ungentlemanly behaviour. She repeatedly implored him to leave, but he stubbornly refused. He told her that he needed her to return a letter that he had written. Unfortunately, Miss Welchman was unable to do this and explained that she had already destroyed it. Mr. James Mitchell, however, was not happy with her response. He again told the young lady that if she wanted him to no longer call on her, she needed to return the letter. Strangely, he then started to behave in quite a peculiar manner. He asked if she would give him supper. Miss Welchman told him that this would not be possible, as all the young ladies who worked there ate together. Mr. Mitchell then asked her if she would let him continue calling. Miss Welchman replied that she no longer wanted him to call on her, but instead of leaving, he asked if she would lend him some money, to which Miss Welchman sternly replied that indeed she would not. By now, Mary Ann was becoming quite concerned. It was late, and he would not leave. He was certainly not acting like a gentleman. She told him to wait in the workroom, as she needed to join Miss Macy and the other young ladies for supper. Around 11 o'clock that night, while Miss Macy and the other staff were in the dining room, Miss Welchman informed them that she had to be alone with Mr. Mitchell for a brief 5 minutes. She then left the table and went upstairs. Just a few minutes later, an ear-piercing scream tore through the air. The chilling sound reverberated through the walls, sending shivers down the spines of anyone within earshot. As the echoes of the scream gradually faded, they were immediately replaced by a series of alarming gunshots. Panic and fear quickly spread, enveloping the house and the streets in an atmosphere of turmoil and terror. Concerned neighbours peered out of their windows, desperately trying to make sense of a disturbing commotion that had abruptly shattered the peace of what had been a tranquil evening. As they watched, they caught sight of a shadowy figure, desperately and hastily descending from the first floor window of Miss Macy's property where the dress shop was located. Miss Macy and two of her employees cautiously went up the stairs and approached the area where the uninvited Mr. Mitchell had been talking to Miss Welchman. As they entered the room, they saw a horrifying sight. Laying silently on the floor was the once vivacious and enchanting Miss Mary Ann Welchman, her radiant beauty now replaced with an aura of tragic stillness. Beside her was a gentleman's hat and two pistols, ominously confirming the dreadful reality that they were unmistakably the instruments used in this most horrible act. The room itself bore haunting signs of the abrupt upheaval, with objects scattered in disarray, a testimony to the chaos and terror that had unfolded. Miss Macy ordered that a doctor come at once, and Mr. Russell, a surgeon who resided at 21 Mount Street, soon arrived. On examination, he found that Miss Welchman had been shot in the head. One bullet had entered her temple, which created a wound large enough for him to put through the tip of his finger. The other bullet had entered her forehead. Miraculously, she was still alive, but unable to speak. However, as the doctor did his best to help, Miss Mary Ann Welchman died. The authorities began an investigation. They ruled out the possibility of an intruder entering or escaping through the window. The shutters had been opened from within the room, and this firmly pointed towards the assailant being someone who was already in the house. Mr. Mitchell had been there at the time, but disappeared after the shots had been fired. There was no police force in the city. Instead, the streets were patrolled by local constables and night watchmen, who were overseen by local magistrates and parish authorities. The lack of centralisation and coordination among law enforcement entities often led to inefficiencies and challenges in maintaining law and order, and as the constables searched for Mr. James Mitchell, they soon realised that he had fled. Everyone who lived in Mount Street seemed to be in profound shock, and the sombre scene left all those who had heard the gunshots and seen a strange man descend from the first floor window of Miss Macy's dressmaking shop somewhat in a state of disbelief. It was the only topic of conversation as people went about their business. It was as though Miss Welchman's tragic demise had become a symbol of the fragility of life and the dark shadow that can loom over even the most peaceful of neighbourhoods. The once vibrant and welcoming dress shop was now shrouded in grief and despair, forever haunted by the terrifying events that unfolded within its walls on that fateful evening. A call for swift justice echoed throughout the streets of Mayfair. The apprehension of Mr. James Mitchell became an urgent necessity, and authorities dispatched officers to locate him. The news of the murder was reported throughout the country, and when word reached Salisbury that the Bow Street magistrate was anxious to speak to Mr. James Mitchell, he was apprehended after being recognised by a farmer for whom he used to work. On the 13th of August, officials from the city transported Mr. Mitchell back to London, where he was questioned. Following these proceedings, he was committed to Newgate Prison, where he would await his trial. It was noted that throughout his ordeal, he remained noticeably unresponsive, wearing a sullen demeanour and maintaining a stoic silence that divulged little about his thoughts and emotions. On Friday the 16th of September 1814, Mr. James Mitchell stood trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of Miss Mary Ann Welchman. The courtroom was packed, with spectators eager to witness the prosecution present its case against someone who they considered was a heartless murderer. The proceedings began with the barrister for the Crown meticulously laying out the chain of events that he claimed had led to the tragic demise of the young lady. Witnesses included the other workers at Miss Macy's Mount Street dress shop and individuals from the neighbourhoods, all of whom told the court of their encounters with the defendants. The evidence against Mr. Mitchell was primarily circumstantial, but when pieced together, it painted a compelling and damning portrait of his guilt. The prosecution claimed that his relentless pursuit of Miss Welchman, even after being told that she was no longer interested in him, demonstrated a clear intent to harm her. When called upon to present his defence, all Mr. Mitchell did was vehemently deny the charges. He said that the pistols and hat found at the scene of the crime were not his. He did not even call anyone who would be able to confirm that he was a person of good character. When all the evidence had been heard, the jury retired to consider the verdict. They returned a short time later to find the defendant, Mr. James Mitchell, guilty. In a hushed courtroom, the judge condemned the enormity of the crime, highlighting the circumstances surrounding the murder of an innocent woman who had only ever shown the defendant kindness. The judge then solemnly pronounced the only sentence he was able to give, and that was that Mr. Mitchell would be returned to prison, and 3 days later, on Monday the 19th of September, he would meet his death by hanging. His body would then be dissected by surgeons. Mr. James Mitchell displayed no emotion as his sentence was passed. On the morning of the execution, a large crowd gathered outside Newgate Prison. The mood was sombre and tense, as many had come to see justice served, while others were drawn by morbid curiosity. As clocks struck the appointed hour, James Mitchell was led out to the gallows. He walked with an air of resignation, accepting his fate with an eerie calmness. The crowd watched in silence as the executioner prepared the noose and placed it around his neck. In his final moments, James Mitchell's detachment seemed to give way to a flicker of remorse as he gazed at the assembled onlookers. Perhaps he finally realised the gravity of what he had done and the irreversible consequences of his actions. Miss Mary Ann Welchman's tragic fate became a symbol of the vulnerability of innocence and the fragility of trust. In the aftermath of the trial and the execution, the memory of Miss Welchman lived on in the hearts of her loved ones, while the name of Mr. James Mitchell became synonymous with malice and treachery. The case of James Mitchell and the murder of Miss Welchman will be forever etched into the annals of criminal history, serving as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk within a human soul. The echoes of this tragic case would continue to resonate through generations, a sombre cautionary tale of love turned to obsession and the devastating consequences of unfettered rage. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to again thank Toon Blast for sponsoring this video. And if you would like to download Toon Blast for free, either scan the URL code or click on the link in the description. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.